people group people based on their skin color or the way that they speak or something, and they say, oh, you're from that culture, you can't change it, or you should work to change it to be more like us, or we just don't like you because you're so different, and it's something you can't change. So this is the real form of abuse of grouping people. People have always grouped people. You watch children, you've seen it. The grandmas all know. You see the kids, the boys versus the girls. We made our group, we're special, versus the other group, right? Kids do it. And humanity always did it. We talked about the ancient times, we talked about medieval times. A lot of this was about, you're not from our region, you're not from our culture, you're not from our religion. There was a lot of, in the ancient times, they were against anti-Judaism. That was the mantra, we have to convert Jews. As soon as they convert, fine, we'll accept them. They were not looking at a Jew as saying, you are racially different. Your noses are too big, and your hair is kinky, or whatever it might be, and we hate you because of that. As soon the ideology was of the Roman Catholic Church that once you will convert, you're in. We like you now.
That's old racism.
That wasn't racism. It was just grouping people based on
religion.
religion.
That's all based on religion.
Based on religion. It was anti-Judaism. So, thousand years before Hitler, racism really begins in Spain against the Jews on a national level. They turned around, and Ferdinand and Isabella were the Christian monarchs. We had moments in Spain of great cultural diffusion, poets and statesmen and merchants, and we talked about that last week. But what I would say to you is that slowly, we said that Maimonides was kicked out of or fled from Spain because Muslim extremists from across the Straits of Gibraltar, where we think of Morocco as today, the Almoravids, they came into Spain, they invaded, and they were Muslim extremists, convert, and we'll accept you, or get out of our new territory. So Maimonides, Harambam, his family was amongst the people that said, well, we'll pretend to convert to Islam, and we'll stay within the Muslim world, but really they were on the move, and they slowly moved across North Africa, eventually to Egypt, where to a more tolerant Muslim society, where they reemerged as Jews. That was something that they had to do. Again, that trade of this false conversion in Spain, we traced it all the way back from the 4th century. There was a tradition in other countries. There's not so much of this idea of pretend to be something you're not, these false oaths. And we talked a little bit about last week about how in Islam, how Harambam later on in life, he's writing correspondence with the Yemenite Jews because extremists came to their area and said, what should we do? Should we take a false oath? How do we deal with this forced extremism? Again, Harambam said, just take the oath because they're monotheists. So pretend that you are conforming to their new culture, and this extremism will pass, and then you will reemerge as Jews. And that was his thinking. When the Christians took over the peninsula through their wars, and I'll show you, if you could see this little map over here, you see the purple is the Christian Europe, and the gold color is the Muslim world. And you see over here, this is Spain, and slowly, in these little sidebars, you see that over a course of a couple of centuries, the Christians were gaining ground and slowly taking over Spain. Once these extremists broke up that great tolerant empire where Jews, Muslims, and Christians were living together and working together and being, studying together, once that was broken up, it was much easier ideologically and then physically for the Christians to retake those lands. This period is called the Reconquista, to reconquest. They say we had a heritage down here, in the 4th century, and the Muslims had ruined it for us. Now we're going to go take it back. So slowly they take over those lands, and a lot of our rabbis, our Spanish rabbis, were living in those lands. Even Ramban, he was called into Barcelona to defend the Talmud. The Christians were in charge. They put the Talmud on trial, and he had to defend the Talmud, and he did so with a man named Pablo Cristiani, who was a converted Jew, who was accepted and became a big leader in the church. And he defended the Talmud so effectively, they said, you know what, you win this dissertation. You are correct in your defense of the Talmud. We can keep Judaism in our midst. That never would have happened in Spain under the Muslims. But under the Christians, that was happening. And we could talk about the fact that Ramban, after he wins this dissertation, they knock on his door literally the next day, and they kick him out of saying, congratulations, you won, but we can't have a scholar like you defending Judaism, because our goal is conversion. We want to convert everybody. And Ramban makes it, across North Africa to more tolerant Muslim places, and eventually to Jerusalem. And we talked about how when he does get to Jerusalem, I'm not sure if we spoke about it, but he does get there, and he talks about the fact that there's less than 10 men living in Jerusalem to even make a minyan. They have to come in from the countryside on Shabbat to make a minyan in Jerusalem. But there are Jews there, and they're living under the Muslims. So that's really very, very, very interesting. And that's he dies in 1204. So this Reconquista period is happening at the same time. And the Christians are taking over Spain. And once they do take over the whole thing and they complete their conquest, they're very, what happens is, along the way, something really crazy happened in the world. Let's preface it like this. Geopolitics does affect us. All the way in China, in the year of 1250, the Mongols all of a sudden invade. In the 1350s, the Mongol invasion. These are horsemen. And they have a new way of fighting on horseback and throwing weaponry, and they conquer most of the known world, all the way from China, all the way to the Middle East, to Jerusalem, to the Mediterranean. They're everywhere. And they really, their culture takes over, and they do become Muslim now, because they really had no point. They just did it because they could do it. It's like a crazy thing. They took over the whole known world. And the reason why it's important is because the Mongols took over, and they did become Muslim in most cases, but there was free trade in this vast empire. And also what happened is bacteria and viruses from all the way from China spread all across the Middle East, and then on merchant ships to the countries in Europe, and this is known as the Black Death. Because of these open borders, because of easy trade, easy and quicker trade. To us, 3 months or 2 years, it seems like a long time for trade to take place, but it was enough for this disease to spread from that part of the world and to infiltrate Europe.
So the Black
Some
Plague
things
started-
never change.
Yeah, the Black Plague. Well, we know it's natural. We know that people are not able to manipulate things. And it decimated most of the known world. They say anywhere from a third, then you hear to a half of the people, died. So if a third is really the more accepted version, then 1 in every 3 people just died from this thing. So people fled the cities. And there's like a good 50 years where just everything stops. Just people flee the cities. They're living in little family units out in the countryside. All over. Because they know it breeds in cities and they don't want to be interactive. So there's this terrible, terrible thing that happens. What does it have to do with Spain? Of course they were affected by it. But what happens is over those from 1350 till about 1391, people go into this crazy depression of why did this happen? What was the cause? They don't understand the disease the way we understand it. What was God saying? And in Spain, because this reunification thing was going on, this reconquest, they got it into their head that God was punishing them. The monks, the friars, the Dominicans, and the Christian friars, you see them in the movies or in depictions with the sackcloth and the rope, around their waist, like they divested themselves of all worldly possessions and pursuits, right? But they were very powerful. The Pope is gilded in gold, and they have icons in gold and money all over the place, right? And these were the pashut, very simple, monks, and people trusted them. And they went on a tirade. God is punishing us, and there's death. We have failed to convert these Jews. And in countries all across, it wasn't just about Jews. They didn't want any other Christian sects to spring up. And they came up with this wonderful idea called the Inquisition. And the Inquisition actually started in France against the Cathar sect in the 1200s. The year is actually escaping me. So they were able to do that, because they wanted to have complete control under their one religion in the way that they wanted it. And the Inquisition was, we're going to haul people in, make the accusations at them, and then punish them accordingly. And if they've lost their faith, we're going to whip them, punish them, show them the truth, and get them to repent. And the Inquisition was gaining more and more power in France. In 1391, this is about 50 years after this death, the Black Plague had begun, people in Spain were really, the church had so much power with the monarchs that there was, for the first time, a forced conversion event where they were in 1391. So people were just livid. It's the Jews. We didn't convert the Jews. They've been too, integrated into our society. They're too comfortable. We've done something wrong here. We have to make this change. We have to change policy. And there was terrible riots that spread from city to city, and where they forcibly converted these Jewish people. And the Pope was totally in on this. This is good. They pain of death. Torturing people till death or conversion, and this took over. So there were many false conversions, people who just did it under duress. So over the next generation, though, if you have a tolerant Pope in Rome taking over and in charge, they turn around and they say, it's under duress, so give them a moratorium where they could decide if they want to be Jewish or not. So a lot of these conversos, some of them may be authentic. We can't take that away. Maybe there was some authentic ones who were just sick of this Jewish thing. But maybe many that were not authentic. There was this time where they were like, well, I could behave Jewish, but I still have on paper this status as being Christian. So I'm getting the benefits of this society. It caused a little bit of a mess in Spanish society. As they were recovering, a lot of the peasant class was like, so they just converted, they were accepted, and now they're marrying into monarchy because they're rich and they have influence, but they're still not eating pork. They're still keeping their Sabbath. What are they doing? They're fake converts. They're not really pious people. So it was a debate. Should we bring the Inquisition in to clean up these conversos or not? And the civil authorities did not want the Inquisition to come in because you're giving too much power to a religious authority. The mayors and governors, the small statesmen did not want it. So it took a while. But about in the 1450s, all of a sudden they did bring it in. And the monarchy is letting this separate body, the Spanish Inquisition, come in, and they're not punishing Jews. They're punishing lapsed Christians. So anybody who's got on the books that their grandpa converted to Christianity or that they're a converso is being hauled in. You didn't attend church. We saw you not praying. Somebody, incidentally, who owes you money, or, or who you have business dealings with, is accused you of in your home, washing your hands before you eat bread. Crazy accusations. And it became a very, very strong and very fearsome body. A lot of Christians were also hauled in, honest Christians. They were like, there was just no escaping from this thing. And it grew in power and power. So by the time you get to the 1492 with Ferdinand and Isabella, this thing is even as strong as the monarchy. You have a question?
No, it's
Sure.
just
A thought.
interesting to point out the way that you said there was no escaping this thing, that the whole web that they're using to entrap people, not enforceable by one central body. It's not like there was this all-powerful intuition board and these 5 people were so amazing at their job that they just entrapped everyone. It's successful because they psychologically trick everybody in society
Yes.
participating in it.
Yes.
From fear,
Yes.
inform on your neighbor, gain benefit by saying a false charge because you'll gain from not having to pay that guy back. And the whole thing succeeds because everybody turns on each other. That's the
Right,
scary
and
thing.
it's tactics.
Your real enemy is your
One of you
your
mentioned
neighbor,
Nazi
not-
Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Look at
there's
COVID.
precedent in history.
Yeah.
And this all of a sudden, a lot of historians point to this as the beginning of the modern period because now you have a state that's now got documents on people. People used to go from country to country, and just move there. Now you've got papers. Now you have birth certificates, and you have death certificates. They know who your grandparents were. They have,
But just like you didn't look about
Tons.
what goes on now, in Israel, for example, during the whole COVID time,
Yeah.
the police stopped even enforcing and handing out tickets for mask wearing. Yet it persisted for 2 years already, and people still yell at each other in the street about it. Like,
Because
"Remember, I couldn't go to the
psychologically-
supermarket without somebody yelling at me about my mask."
We're all
The
gonna get in
average
trouble.
person,
Mhm.
you need to take this on. And
Right,
people-
right. The piety, right. A civilian feels like he's involved in it. I know there was an outrage over here when some official said somewhere in the news for a minute, maybe we should offer a reward for neighbors, people to
Right.
call up on their neighbors and see if they're having a gathering in the backyard. And immediately, the government said, we don't do that in a free country. You don't spy on your neighbors. This is
Like,
an
it's lucky
old
for us
tactic.
right now that they're doing that. It's just a
Right.
terrifying
So
prospect.
this
They
idea.
push, they tried.
The idea of a state control, but this was the Inquisition control. And when Ferdinand and Isabella, gave it sanction and they said, we're going to get rid of all of the problem with these conversos really, really, really is that we still have a Jewish community in our country. And this Jewish community, they're influencing those converted Jews to return back. They have cousins, they have friends. They're keeping relations up.
So these the ones they call Moranos?
So Moranos is a term that they don't really use anymore because it's a little bit derogatory. Morano in Spanish means pig. So we don't know if it's the Jewish people that called the converted Jews pig.
Right.
He's Isaac the Morano,
Yeah.
and that became the family name, or if it's or if it's the Christians that called it to them. Saying, prove to us that you eat pork. And this is really a reason why a lot of, they say, Spanish cuisine has pork in practically every recipe. Because people want to just prove, have friends over. See, we're eating pork. This is like a crazy thing. So Ferdinand and Isabella allowed this in. Once they unified everything except Portugal, which was on the side, it was a separate kingdom for a moment, really. And they were unifying the culture. And they all of a sudden said, but this is the thing. They were saying, these Jews are the cause. We've converted those Jews, but you can't get the Jew out of them. They didn't have the words to say DNA. They didn't have the words to say it's their genes. It's in their blood was the best thing that they could say. And we're adults here. We know this whole idea of Spanish honor. Right? It's all about blood purity. And we know Sephardic people, in our tradition, Jewish people, they would say, I'm a Sephardi tahor. That became a thing. My blood is pure Sephardi. It's funny because the Jewish community started to get this lingo saying, well, yeah, well, we're a purebred Jew and we're not involved with you. And that, when they finally left, became a point of honor. I'm a pure Jew. I was never mixed with a converso or mixed later. They use it as Ashkenazi. And it's like not really a nice thing in a sense because it's saying, I am elite. I am a different group. My Jews. So it's defining your religion as an ethnic identity that you can't change, just like your skin color, your hair color. Thank you. And that's what they did. That's what they did. Racism as a trait, because elsewhere, like we said, you could convert to Christianity throughout the Middle Ages and they would accept you. And to prove themselves, they very often ended up as priests or high in the church. And unfortunately, that's what happened. But here they were looking at them and said, we got to punish you until we get it out of you. And can we? Can we get it out of you? So far,
Beating it out of them.
right? And can we ever? So when they finally say we're going to expel the Jews and just get them off the continent, they said the new Christians, the people who had converted, those conversos, they said we're not going to let them travel. It's a new thing for the world at the time. We're not going to let them travel off the continent until like 3 or 4 generations. We got to get that blood out of them. This is racism. And so it's ironic that today, you get like crazy, people want to just define it as people of one skin color or one ethnicity and just say, oh, you don't know what racism is, you can't talk about it. We're hearing things like, just as a quick example, I know of one young man who's in Baruch College and he's in an English class this last winter, and they had a choice of topics. They had an activist teacher, and she gave a choice of different topics. So he really couldn't relate to a lot of these funky, offbeat things. I don't want to say because we're sitting in front of Sefer Torah, horrible things. So he said, I'll write about racism. I'll write about the Holocaust, racism, right? And this activist teacher, who was a woman, who was African American, said, absolutely not. You can't write about racism. The only thing we know about racism. And it's like you got to teach a professor about, you don't know basic history, or you're changing it on purpose. We can have a whole discussion of why.
They want the exclusive rights to racism.
Right. They want to redefine. So I'm not saying this is not a great thing. It's a horrible thing. So at the same time that this was taking over the continent, the peninsula, the Spanish peninsula, elsewhere things are going to change. And the Sephardic Jews, amazingly, are a part of this, of the change. In this dark moment, 2 branches of exiles really, really affect and bring out the modern enlightened world. And I want to trace that. So many Jews, they were going to leave Spain. They were given the choice, let's get out of here. So a lot of them chose to go to Portugal. It's right there. It's landlocked. It's land border. Easy. It's like us going to Canada, right? Similar languages, and we have maybe business there. Well, of course, 10 years later, Portugal, the king of Portugal, it's either him or his son. I think that he's a young monarch. He wants to marry Ferdinand and Isabella's daughter. So now he's got to bring in, he held off the Inquisition for a while. He was able to. But eventually it's brought in. So the abuse in Portugal happened the first 10 years later, and then another 10 years because he was able to hold it off for a while. So those Jews did not get freedom, but they were able to be Jewish and behave Jewishly, and learn and be participating in their Judaism a little bit longer than, say, Spanish Jews. So Spanish Jews were lost to us first, but amazingly, we do know of networks, or beginning in Morocco, that place where those extremists were, there was a Spanish Jewish community. The Palachi family is very famous for this. They ran to Morocco and they produced rabbis. But some of the family was some of the young men of the family were going, if you know your map, Even if we look at this for a second, you see, here's Spain, and here's North Africa. Just over the Straits of Gibraltar in Morocco, they're free, basically, under Muslim rule. So they're running, they're doing a black market business. A lot of the Jews that are living there, the Palachi family, going into Spain. So they're running black, because now Spain is like closed itself off, from other countries. And what they're doing is they're running this black market. They're also delivering sidurim and tefillin and giving them support and saying, look, when are you going to jump over? When are you going to, we'll sneak you. There's some things are going on. The Jews did not forget their brethren. So the North African Jews, a huge diaspora forms Morocco, Algeria, Tunis, or Tunisia, all Egypt, all these exiles. And what happens is it's very sad in a way, because this is not planned migration. Just like the way you see things, it's chaotic at the border, or when a country is failing. All these people, we think it's hundreds of thousands. It's not under 1 million, but that's a huge amount for those days. They're fleeing Spain, and they come to a community, and a Jewish community tries to help them, but then the outlawing community says, look, we don't have sewage, we don't have housing, we don't have food for all these people. Send your co-religionists on. So they have to wander to the next country, and to the next, and to the next. And there is this huge diaspora of Spanish Jews, people who are physicians, who are needed. They'll keep them there. Oh, yeah, we like that guy.
Pick and choose.
Right. So a lot of people have to keep migrating. So over the course of 20 years, they're migrating in the Muslim countries. And some of them end up, and some of them because they were merchants on the Mediterranean Sea, a lot of them end up in what's known in the city of Istanbul. And Istanbul is a port city. And the Muslim, the emperor famously, supposedly says, this Ferdinand is a fool because he's throwing out this merchant class, and he's making his country poorer and making mine richer. So he welcomes a lot of these exiles. Why? Because they have knowledge of European languages, so they could, and the Muslims have a rule that they don't want to really send Muslims to the lands of the unfaithful. So the Jews serve as agents, as go-betweens. They could speak the language, and they're flying under the Turkish flag. The Ottomans had grown after the Black Plague. They were a family that just, in this devastation in that Turkic country, they just started in the town, and they took over slowly, and they expanded, and pretty soon they were, the head of the empire, because they filled that vacuum. And they were very good at city building and orchestrating and using resources because they had developed in that difficult time. And what they offered was, it turned out to be 700 years of uninterrupted and stable rule, father to son, father to son, father to son. The Ottomans, from the late 1200s all the way up to end of World War I. So it was a stable place, and so many Jews ended up in the port cities, these Spanish Jews. Oh, sorry. So some Jews didn't make it. Some Jews, when they fled from Spain and Portugal, they were victims of piracy. Have you ever heard the Barbary Pirates? It's like an old-fashioned word. It's a mutilation of the word Berber, the Berber Muslims of North Africa. They're pirates, and they held Jews ransom, or they just sold them into slavery. And there were, there's stories of disease on boats and devastation. And so we also have reports of Jews who were, as they were being kicked from town to town, some of them saying, I can't take this anymore. And Spain was actually saying, listen, if you come back, we'll offer you your land and your house back. This is all going on between 20 and 40 years. We'll give you your homes and your estates back. We have your money sitting there waiting for you.
Really?
And there were, unfortunately, stories of people that went back They just said, I can't make it. I can't do this. I can't
Wander.
I can't be a wanderer.
I wouldn't have believed them.
Right,
Why
but they
did
do
wander?
have,
They were so desperate.
they were so desperate.
Wander for
They
that reason.
couldn't-
But why would
Can't
they,
settle.
right, but why would they think that they want them back then?
They sent out emissaries, there was communication in
At
these,
that point, they just want to believe anything's better than
No, no,
wandering.
but I'm
Yeah.
saying, why would the Spanish people want them back if they?
right, the locals may not have wanted it, they wanted them back because they didn't know that they did lose a business class. And it's always about the economy.
Right, well, it should be.
There are whole towns in the interior where a whole town moves to Portugal, from Spain to Portugal, and then the entire town, once Portugal adapts the Inquisition, Spain, the fathers of town say, you know, you could come back. We're so in the interior, they don't really check on us. Come move back. And we have towns that do this. So there's this split personality that these poor people have, where they're hiding their Judaism, but some of them were active Jews for a very long time, and they were there for generations. So
So, excuse me.
yeah,
so
sure, go ahead.
this, when they all left, basically, when they started from the Inquisition, that's when our people started going to the Middle East,
Right.
and that's how we wound up in Syria.
So think about two branches. So some that went immediately to the Middle East, went to the Ottoman countries. So you're going to start out in Istanbul, and Istanbul, in like 50 years, the Jews take over like the city of Salonika. Also, it's another port city. Salonika, Izmir, and Istanbul become three port cities where the Jews dominate. They plant themselves. And it's Jews of different regions of Spain, and they all had different dialects. And they really even couldn't communicate fully with each other. So they used this kind of pidgin Spanish and Hebrew and Arabic called Ladino. It becomes a language that was never spoken in Spain, and it's spoken in a lot of these countries. So they start out in Turkey, and now I wanted to get to this cute point, is that a lot of those wanderers, some of them that do make it to Istanbul, because it's this big federal government that can't really get to everywhere, they meet a lot of these Jews and say, wait, you were in Tunis? Oh, you were there? Oh, wait, we've never been there. And you speak, you know what, go back as the governor. So all of a sudden, literally, you have people that were kicked out, and then 5 years later, they're showing up as government officials. Because in Istanbul, they said, wait, but you're a sophisticated person that went to university, what was known as a university in those days, and the Jews brought to them whatever was known of science, and a huge thing, navigation. The Jews were navigators, and they on their boats, and they developed the compass and the astrolabe. The Muslims had invented it, but the Jewish navigators were known to be experts in it, and they were also helping the Muslims navigate all the seas. We know that Jews, so the Jews, one branch went to that part of the world, and eventually lots of them went to Damascus and Aleppo and Jerusalem. And Jerusalem was a quiet backwater place until the next person that I'm going to tell you about. But in Aleppo and Damascus, Ladino never took over because you had indigenous people there. It was in our days, the community lasted from today, from our vantage point, 2,700 years. In Iraq and in Aleppo, they're very old communities. So the Jews that were there, and the Spanish people are coming in with their ways, with their dress, with their prayer book, with their tunes, their songs, their European ways. They quickly dominated. Very quickly, they put together a siddur. They had never had one before, because the Jews also brought with them the printing press to the Ottoman Empire. They were like a boon. Like all of a sudden, here's these sophisticated people coming in to this place that was not technologically, keeping up. But yet they were control of most of the world. So they gave the Ottomans a burst of creativity. So the Jewish community, there was a big uproar because they had differences of the holiday prayers. The local Jews, the indigenous Jews, were called Mustarav, meaning they were Arabized culturally. They were Arabic speakers. They had the music, the songs, the dress of the Arab world, right, like everybody else. But they were Jewish. So, but now came the Spanish Jews,
They're called the Sephardic.
and they are the Sephardim. So for many years, they had different laws of the mikveh. They had, that mikveh has to be this length and that width, and they did not mix right away. In some of those countries where they were very, very established, it was difficult to mix.
So we don't know which families it was. I mean, they probably could know.
But it's late 1700s, they do come together. They do.
You go to Israel,
They do.
the museum, right?
Mhm.
They could trace
Yes.
the genealogy.
Yes.
Were you part of the Mustarav?
Yeah,
or the
I think I
Sephardic?
can go that far back, I think so.
They can.
Yeah, we know
They
the
can.
Sephardic,
Yes.
because we know. We did
Yes. Yes, they do.
Spain.
They
So,
do,
excuse me,
but
so
they
you're
definitely,
saying all the
My father
many
did it,
people
straight out of
We're
Morocco.
from Spain, but how do we know we're not from the
So a lot of-
indigenous ones that
so
were
it could be,
there?
but we're probably both at this point. Because what I was gonna get to, if we continue with the class next week, was gonna get up to the 1700s, when already Europeans, they're already mixing, and I'll show you why they mix and how they mix. There's an economic reason why they do that.
It's funny, Sephardic.
But in the beginning, it's a very separate thing.
Very general.
In Istanbul and Salonika and Izmir, it's mostly Spanish, and there's Greek Jews that are there, and then there's like a whole mixture that goes on, and a lot of Sephardim there. In fact, in the 1800s, when Spain starts, the late 1800s starts to finally come out of its shell, because they're with this magical, thinking for a long time, this racist thinking. And I call magical because they're thinking that they're rewarded, because
How were they
I'll
doing
t-
financially
Who?
during that whole time,
Who?
Spain?
because they
Did
discovered the New World at the same time, and in 1492, yeah. And so they're basically exploiting the silver and gold, silver mines of South America and the riches of the Incas, and they do make a lot of money, so they feel rewarded for their policy.
So it only further made them
Yes.
feel we did the right
Yeah, and
thing.
most of the free world, which is going to develop from the Spanish Jews who don't go immediately, the Spanish Portuguese Jews that stay in Western Europe incognito, and then eventually who emerge as Jews in the 1600s and 1700s are going to be responsible for bringing about the Enlightenment. Their influence. I won't say that there's a lot that they participate in. So you have in the Ottoman world a Portuguese Jew named, we call him Joseph Hanasi, Joseph the leader. A fantastic story with him is, and he's a transformative figure because he was born in Portugal into a converso family. His aunt was this young woman. Her name, we know her as Donna Gracia. I don't know if anyone's heard of her. Her name is Donna Gracia. Her Spanish fake name was Beatrice Luna. Donna Gracia. Donna Gracia, born in Portugal in the early 1500s to a converso family. And what happened was the Inquisition was in full force. And she was in her young 20s, and she had one little daughter and her big merchant family. Her husband died, her father-in-law died, and her brother-in-law, who also died, who was a physician, all within like a 2 or 3 year period.
Died or killed?
All died. They all died of illnesses, old age, whatever it was. She was left, this woman, to be the head of this shipping family, of this business. She was 29 years old, and all of a sudden she was in charge. And she's very famous because it's scary. It's not just that you're running a business. You're also living this incognito life. Because you're so rich, the authorities know about you and you have to pretend to be Christian. So she has one little daughter and the estates and the business, and she has to run it. She's sharp. She's really very sharp. And she has a nephew that's in boarding school. And he's going to be known as Joseph Hanasi. Joseph. I forget Don Manuel, I forgot what his name, no, that's the monarch, what his fake name was. It escapes me, I'm sorry. So he was going to school, in boarding school with all the future kings and monarchs of Europe, basically.
But he's Jewish.
Jewish,
He knows
and,
he's Jewish.
and he knows to hide it very
Right,
well.
okay.
But because he's very smart and they're very conniving, they're very good business people, she's the one that came up with the idea of importing pepper and spices from the Far East. When we talk about the spice trade and people were making money, she was the one who started that import. It was her idea. So this is how influential and how wealthy she was. She had the monopoly on the spice trade.
It was tremendous.
It was tremendous. That's the whole thing. The Europeans were like, how do we get in on this spice trade? It was all her. She was the one that conceived of the idea. And they had shipping houses in every single port of Europe. And in the ports were their fellow conversos, fake Jews, living in Christian countries, mostly in Italy and all along the basin. The Roman Church was so strong. So they were all people pretending to be Christian, but yet they're extremely loyal to her, and they're making money. And and she's supporting them and helping them, and she has shipping houses all over the known world, and she has this nephew. And he starts to, the nephew, as a teenager, now it's just them, and he starts to lend a lot of the young monarchs money on their gambling debts. And he starts to know all their secrets, who their mistresses are and who their court intrigues is.
Yeah,
And
there's information.
he becomes the best friend of everybody. But they know very little about him, but he's the guy. Very famously, they lend the Habsburgs money. The Habsburg Empire. That's what I needed to memorize. I remember in 9th grade, I had to learn the whole family tree of the Habsburgs. These were the monarchs of Europe. They controlled every country and this and that. Meanwhile, they owed all their money. They owed tremendous debt, so much that they couldn't pay back this family. Okay? So he had them in his pocket. And once he's of age, he's helping her run this business. And a lot of families depend on them, keeping this secret. And at one point, the Spanish Empire grows through conquering. They take over what we think of as Amsterdam. They get that far. And England is freaking out because they don't want them, and they beat them back. Well, when they're in charge of Amsterdam, she quickly opens up a shipping house there and gets herself over there, right? Get off the continent because they don't want to let them leave. So they get over there. And she's hobnobbing over there, keeping up the facade while the Spanish are part of it. And the monarchs in Antwerp and these places famously say to her, you know, your young daughter is so beautiful. Why don't she become one of the courtiers? And of course, they want her money, and they want her, and she could have a marriage with one of the young nobles. She famously, it's recorded, they said that she actually blurted out, over my dead body. Right, so they were like, if we had suspicions, oh no, oh no. So they have to hatch an escape plan to get them out of this part of the empire. And because it's not, Portugal itself, they pay obviously lots of money, and they actually make it to a nobleman in Italy that says that he'll protect them. And they make it to
They leave everything behind.
they don't leave everything behind, they keep everything going. So she and the daughter run to Italy, and then eventually they make the jump to the Ottoman Empire, where a lot of their trade is coming from. So they've got this whole network. Joseph, the nephew, is still pretending, oh, could you believe my aunt and my cousin ran to these terrible Ottomans, and he's keeping up the facade and keeping it going. Obviously, he's working with them because they have this whole network of communication through their boats, and they're people who are loyal to them. Incidentally, that the Spanish Empire does get beaten back, and Amsterdam becomes actually in Holland and Amsterdam becomes a place of tolerance when the Dutch take over, and it does, like maybe had she waited, they would not have had to flee. But it's a few years later. So at any rate, they make it to the Ottoman Empire, and she opens herself up as a Jew, and she reverts to Judaism, and she supports the rabbis and collecting a lot of material that the Jews brought, and she's very pious, and she's very into let's preserve what we've lost, our Sephardic identity, and what besides running the business. And eventually, Joseph, a couple of years later, he concocts another story. I have to stop my niece and from marrying some crazy Muslim, like creating fantasy stories, and he makes the jump, leading other Jews along with him. They make the jump, and yet the business is still running.
Well, no one's closing it down yet.
Right. So because they need it too much. These Jews are the importers of
Right,
Europe.
okay.
So they kind of need it. And they owe him money. So he begins to serve the Sultan in a capacity where he is basically a statesman, but the Muslims don't really want a Jew to have a position as foreign minister. So he's written in their records as a gentleman of great knowledge of the West, but yet somehow when ambassadors, and this began to go on from Venice, from France, from England, would come to the Sultan to try to court favor and make some sort of political deal, he knew everything that they were going to say before they said it. And they couldn't figure out, how does this man know all of our information? And it's because he had agents in every single court in the empire, reporting, sending messages to his shipping houses, and when the ships would come in, they would feed him information, often on the same ship that the ambassador would travel in on. And the British historian Cecil Roth even wrote, he said, this man was the prototype of spying, of modern spying. Nobody could understand how he was doing it. It was a silent network. Everybody was loyal to him. At one point, a very extremist pope turned around and said, the Jews, he was angry that in Ancona, Italy, the shipping house says, there's conversos here, and I'm very shocked. However they crossed him somehow. I'm shocked. We're going to bring in the Inquisition and put these men on trial. Now, when you do that, it means if you don't confess, you have to confess, and they may still kill you, or they're going to do this terrible, a public display and torture these people. So these were some of the Gracia family merchants. So she was outraged, Donna Gracia. For now, like 20 years or so, she's been living free. And she says, no, they're not going to do it. She turned to a lot of the other business moguls, the Jewish business moguls living in Istanbul, and she said, let's boycott Europe. Let's say, unless you release our Jewish people, we're boycotting you. We're free. Why don't we organize and help these men? Help them. Let's strangle them. Let's stop them with their horrible policies. We would call it racist today. She says, let's stop them. And she really was mounting the first ever Jewish organized protest. Boycott. No one had thought to ever do this. She says, let's use our economic power. We'll bring them to their knees. And it was about to go into effect, but some of the other businessmen prevailed. They said, if you do this in Ancona, you might succeed, but there'll be a backlash of the Jews in hiding all over what's now known as Italy, all the other papal states, and all over France. They will harm them. You have to think of those people. And it's a really intelligent argument. You'll love what she's saying. Just do it. But there's so many people living in hiding. Clearly they're showing us they know where they are. And they're being very humble about the way that they're living, but you're putting them all in danger. So this boycott never took place. And you wonder in history what could have happened. And she was devastated. So she receded from the business life, left her nephew to run this whole thing, and she moved to Safed in Tiberias. What was going on there? I'll end it here as we have a couple more minutes. Is that Joseph Hanasi, being obviously the leader of the Jewish community, he turned around and he asked the Ottomans in return, I'm making you money, we're making money, we're all doing all these things. He says, I want one thing in return. I want you to give me a mandate for Israel. Let me bring my people there. It's economically a wasteland. Can I help you build it up? And they said yes. And he was brilliant. He got not just the Sultan who was on the throne at the time, he got his aged grandfather to sign the mandate and the young son. So present, past, and future. He was trying to establish that this is a thing. And he went and he threw tons of money into building up Tiberias. And the what we know as the Kinneret, right? Because you go to a body of water. There were subsistence farmers living there, Jewish and Arab, Mustarav Jews, because no Sephardic person, it's not an economic place. I'm going to build it up. I'm going to economically bring an industry there. He brings the wool dyeing industry there. And it's a body of water. We're going to have trade, we're going to have merchants, and he tries to build it up. And Jews from all over Italy, when we knew, because Italy wasn't unified yet, but all over the Papal States, all over people with Spanish names all of a sudden start showing up all over Israel. Not only Tiberias was becoming an economic center, Safed was in the mountains from Tiberias. You drive there today, it takes you 3 hours to just go up in the mountains, becomes a place for Jewish spiritual revival.
So
The Kabbalists.
What year is it?
So this is in the 1500s. This is exactly, I have it written down, 1558. Okay, 1558, you have 4 cities in this Spanish settlement. Okay, it's Tiberias, Safed, where the Kabbalists start to sit, and Donna Gracia, she receives from public life, and she's supporting them. She's throwing lots of money for them to build that city up, and she wants to help bring about a spiritual revival. This is where Kabbalah starts to have a revival, where they're saying, one moment, also Jerusalem. Now we start to see a revival in Jerusalem. There were people there. We saw that the Sultan in 1538 had started to rebuild the city walls and the Kotel Plaza in 1538. But by 1558, this is 20 years later, when Joseph Hanasi, he's saying, okay, so let me bring, Jews are there. They start to settle. The Jews are living in the old city again.
Okay, Bella Hadid doesn't know.
This is a huge thing, and it's a huge problem. This is called the Old Yishuv, and also Hebron. Because they also, we had seen that from the 700s, when the Muslims first conquered, the Jerusalem the first time before the Crusaders came, the Jews helped them conquer Hebron, and they built Marat HaMachpelah. Well, again, he revitalizes it. There were Jews in Hebron. It was always an economic place. They're living there, and they lived there until 1929, until the riots. So this is known as the Old Yishuv. And Jews are there from 1558 at least. We know that the indigenous Jews were there, subsisting. And it gets even a little scarier because I'm collecting curriculum for my high school class and videos and things going on. And there's this big blank. The Zionists came in 1948, or in the 1990 Herzl.
That's when they start to lose info.
Why are they ignoring the entire Spanish issue? Because there was the rabbis, there were the Kabbalists, and you have a philosophy, unfortunately, of irreligious people who want to negate the entire rabbinical period. They want to connect us to King David and King Shaul. Whole Second Temple period, they want to erase it. They want to erase rabbinical Judaism that developed over the 2,000 years. They want to break the yoke of the rabbis. And we're a people, not a religion. This is their thinking. And even in some material that's being made today, that would help the Palestinian problem, saying, look at the eras of coexistence. And that's where I'm going to go into the history. What was the population of Jerusalem specifically in all of Israel? And what was going on between trade, between Aleppo, Damascus, Jerusalem, Greece, Turkey, Istanbul? There's a huge, huge, huge population there of coexistence. I'm not saying Jews are the majority, but clearly not.
But they were there.
So you're erasing their entire existence, and they don't talk about Joseph. And I see, and he's scholared, all the history books talk about him. I mean, he's there. This is not, just a marginal figure. He is responsible for the influx of Jews, and it's called the Spanish Yishuv, the old Yishuv. And these families were living there. It's not an easy place to live. So most people do pick to live in Syria. Let's be honest, and in Lebanon on the coast and things like that. But there is a huge, huge presence due to this man, and he's not given the credit. Again, it's entwined with religiosity and the revival of Kabbalah and mysticism, because those rabbis in Safed were saying, we're here physically, but we don't have the Messiah, we don't have God's sanction. Let's do our Kabbalah thing in order to bring God into the world, and maybe we'll get Nevuah again, and maybe get that going again. We want the spiritual okay. We could get that. And that's that. In Jerusalem, meanwhile, other yeshivot that were not of the Kabbalistic mindset, but Sephardic style of learning were beginning to form in this period. So I'll leave it there. And so you have these two branches who are working with each other, but eventually they're going to meet up. So this is a very huge Sephardic presence in what's going to become the modern state of Israel. And unfortunately, it doesn't get enough play. And I'd like to change that. I don't know how we're going to do it, except just get the word out, So that's where I'm going to leave it there.